Hello fantastic creatures, I'm fantasims and welcome to my channel. In today's video we're going to construct this iconic Hogwarts house points counter from the Harry Potter movies using only objects from the game. This little decoration was actually very time consuming, but thankfully the main sand timers were quite easy to construct. I just used these debug candy jars from the new Paranormal Stuff Pack, base game debug test tubes sized up, and I think the clear glass flask bottles are debug from Get to Work, but I can't really remember. I used T.O.O.L mod to rotate them upside down to make the sand timer bottleneck. At first I was going to use the candy jars upside down as well, but then I realized they looked better in their original position, and I'm so happy that the colors the jars come in are close to the Hogwarts house colors. Then I used these base game debug glasses of colored drinks as the colored sand to represent each of the Hogwarts houses. The red looked a bit orange, and the blue is a lot lighter than the royal blue of Ravenclaw House, but it's close enough. I didn't really like that you can see the rim of the glasses, but I figured it kind of looks like marked lines of how many more points each team has. Yeah, we'll just go with that. One thing that made it a bit trickier to construct is how the gaps are greater when you position something diagonally than when you place it straight. And although you can use the Alt key to put objects where you want, it's so much easier when they all just lock into the same position when you're layering objects on top of each other. But the gaps between the sand timers on the straight wall were not wide enough, so I used a sized up radiator from Vampires as a guide, and I used T.O.O.L mod to shift over the flasks as an entire unit so I wouldn't have to spend ages trying to align all the objects on top of each other. I thought these ones from Realm of Magic were also perfect for the iron framework that holds the sand timers, so I rotated them upwards and downwards 90 degrees, and I used a cabinet that I positioned halfway through the flasks to act as a guide for where to position these rotated ones. And I did struggle a bit with aligning them seamlessly on top of each other, and they're not perfect, but I did my best. I ended up not needing a guide for the diagonal ones though, because thankfully the ones just locked into position. I'm making a diagonal and straight version because even though my Great Hall in my Hogwarts build is diagonal, some of you might want to build the Great Hall in a straight shaped room. And as some of you pointed out on Twitter, you could use these in a candy or ice cream shop, which gave me the idea to reuse these when I build the Weasley's Wizard Wheezes candy shop in Diagon Alley. Man, that's a tongue twister. I then rotated the Journey to Batuu wall decorations by 90 degrees to lay flat so I could use them as the metal parts that hold the sand timers in place and attach them to the iron framework, but they didn't really look very good on top, so I scrapped the idea. But they're not wasted because I end up using them on the bottom later on. Now, I was still not happy with how orange the Gryffindor sand timer looked, so I used a red candle from Eco Lifestyle, which also happens to have a bit of an orange tint to it, but it was more red, and I resized it and placed it inside the flasks just to give it a darker and brighter colour. I tried using just candles in each of the sand timers, but they didn't look right. The solid colour of the candles was just not as good as the textured look of the drinks, which suits the look of sand so much better. Then I needed to find another object to attach the sand timers to the frame at the top, and I didn't want to just rotate the ones I'd already used because they'd look too chunky. So I settled on these debug fire sticks that I had to keep resizing with T.O.O.L mod because at the tips of the fire sticks are these little white chunky things that kind of look like marshmallows, and I needed them small enough that I could hide them inside the candy jars. So that took a lot of tweaking until I finally got the size right. Then, at the front of the sand timers, there are these decorative metal rods with crests of each of the 4 houses on them that slide up and down the pole based on the level of sand in each container so that you can see who's in the lead. And at first I was going to just use these star ones from Realm of Magic, but the gold in them was just too bright and gaudy for the rest of the design, so I replaced them with the same wand I used for the frame and came up with my own custom decorations to try and mimic how it looks in the movie later on. And then I sized down these award crests that are wall decorations to act as the house crests that slide up and down the pole, so you'll see me in the footage building and deleting the wall several times so that the wall objects don't lock into it when I'm building. And then after I had positioned all of these crests to match the sand levels inside the sand containers, I then used these gem thingies from Journey to Batuu to represent each of the house colors. And thankfully there's a royal blue version, so at least Ravenclaw gets better representation in this mini house crest I made. And since the gems are tilted down slightly, I did straighten them up by about 5 or 10 degrees. And I must note that these gems and the wands have a huge footprint. So once you position them, if you try to select another object nearby, it won't let you until you move the wands and gems out of the way first. So it can be a bit inconvenient, but I've worked with them before, so I'm kind of used to it. So the trick was to position them perfectly before moving on to the next, because you can't go back and reposition them without having to move the wands out of the way first, which is why it took me so long to just place those gems. Anyway, I used the pipe caps from Get to Work sized down as hinges and rotated a debug salt shaker on the side that will later attach to the gears. Now, up to this point, I've been building on the ground because it's easier to position objects that way, but now that I needed to build the gears and gearbox on the side, it was time to elevate the whole thing, but I had to do it in sections because I couldn't click on the coloured cups inside the tubes. Now, at the bottom of the house crest sliding posts are these metal decorations of like crescent moons and a sun, and what looks like a rattlesnake tip for Slytherin. So it took me a while to find objects I could use to mimic these decorations, and I think they turned out pretty good. I think the one I did for Hufflepuff with the Journey to Batuu objects is my favourite, which I'm glad about because I think Hufflepuff is too often neglected, so I'm really glad they have a moment to shine a bit. The difficulty though was getting the objects to blend into the one pole without clipping issues, so I had to spend time tweaking the size and placement over and over. And something that helped them blend was sizing down some of the decorative base game metallic vases that I used for Ravenclaw and Slytherin. And if you zoom in close, they're not entirely seamless, but it was as close as I could get it without having to make the decorations too big. And I was trying so hard to make it look identical to the movie set prop. So for example, it has this curved iron beam thing that holds it to the wall, and these gears on the left side that I'm assuming help rotate the sand timers to reset them at the end of the school year. And I was trying to figure out what little items I could use to rotate in the exact shape of the movie version, but I later realised that it would be better to just use solid, simpler objects that give the impression of a gear and a hinge instead, because I'm going to be making so many objects like this for my Hogwarts castle build that I don't want to add excessive objects and cause unnecessary lag. I already know my Hogwarts build is going to be intense with detail. So I used the Realm of Magic brass scale as the hinge, and the metal wall brackets from Strangerville as the frame that will hold the gears together. Side note, I temporarily use this Hogwarts painting to take pictures for Twitter. It's a noCC painting made by Jules64, so you can download that yourself. Then for the gears, I use sized down versions of the Journey to Batuu round wall decorations because it has a ton of 3D detail, and I did a mirror image of all these objects so that it has detail on both sides instead of just a flat surface. Now, because they are wall objects, they drop to the floor every time you reposition them, which is a bit inconvenient and took extra time, but it was worth the extra effort. And then I layered the other round wall decoration on top to give it more of a wheel look. And I chose the darker greyish black swatch to help tie into the dark frame holding the sand timers, because it didn't look as cohesive with all these pale grey objects to the side of the darker looking structure, if that makes sense. I made smaller versions of the Strangerville wall brackets too, and I rotated them by 45 and 90 degrees so that I could build a support for the gearbox that goes on top of the gears. I love how it has a bit of an industrial steampunk look to it, which is one of my favourite styles to create. I added another pipe cap sticking out because this is where the chain wraps around to rotate the gear wheels. And since we don't have any rounded chains and I wasn't about to spend hours rotating little objects to look like a chain, I just used the debug curved wires from Journey to Batuu. They don't connect perfectly at the bottom, and I couldn't wrap them around every gear, but I think at least it helps with the illusion that there's a chain moving the gears. Now it was time to connect the base of the glass tubes to the frame, and so I used the round wall decoration I had rotated earlier and placed them at the base of the flasks. Then I used the toggle select feature of the tool mod and duplicated them all once they were positioned, and rotated the duplicates by 180 degrees so that they would sit perfectly underneath. And I really like how the shape turned out. The last thing to construct was the gearbox, and the movie version is metal and elaborate, so to get that kind of look I used the Journey to Batuu metal chests and then sized down the new trunks we got with the Paranormal Stuff Pack because the details on it help give it more of an intricate feel. Again, it's easier to build on the floor, so I positioned the boxes underneath the metal bracket so that once I finished shaping it I could just elevate the whole thing. To decorate the top, I just used another Journey to Batuu wall object and a debug base game lamp head because it has this nice rusted metal look to the top of it. Oh, and I did place a couple more pipe caps as little gears that sit underneath the box before I made the boxes as well. The wall decoration wasn't low enough for me to figure out where to place it on top of the box before lowering it with the tool mod, so I just used an elevated version of the box to help guide me in live mode. Then it was time to elevate both boxes and do a couple of little size adjustments to the pipe caps. Then I decided to change the swatch of the Realm of Magic brass or copper scale to the light grey version because it tied in better with the gears. And that was basically it. I was finally finished. Oh, I forgot to mention that I used the Ambrosia dog treats because they sparkle in live mode, so I put them inside Gryffindor's sand timer so it looks like the levels are magically going up. I learned this trick from the amazing Sadie Sim from her Beauty and the Beast castle. Of course, if you would prefer another house to be in the lead, feel free to add more cups to the sand timer. I just copied the levels from the movie set. I hope you enjoyed constructing this fun, whimsical object with me today. Even if you're not a Harry Potter fan, I'm sure you can find a use for it. I'll have a link to where you can download it from the gallery in the description below. Stay tuned as I continue to make more objects like this for my Building Hogwarts series. If you like this video, please give it an encouraging thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell to be notified about fresh content. As always, thanks for your amazing support, and I love you so freaking much.